Welcome back to another explainer. Let's just jump right in today, because we're unpacking something absolutely fascinating. We're looking at a groundbreaking framework by Cassan from his book Adaptive Autonomy, The Architecture of Social Transformation in Africa. Have you ever wondered why these massive, super well-funded social programs seem to just collapse, literally the minute the TV cameras pack up and leave the launch event? Well, Cassan argues it's actually not a failure of willpower or corruption or people just being lazy. It is a fundamental structural flaw in how we literally build our institutions. And the best part, as we dig into this today, we'll see he actually maps out a real systemic cure to fix it. Let's get into it.
To really wrap our heads around this problem, picture this stark contrast. Imagine a massive 4.2 billion shilling health tech initiative launching in Nairobi, right at the KIC. The president's there, cameras are flashing all over the place, people are handing out these glossy policy manuals making grand promises about real-time biometric tracking across all 47 counties. Sounds amazing, right? But fast forward just 18 months and travel 400 kilometers away to a small rural dispensary in Kilifi. What do you actually see? You find a broken, still-in-the-box biometric terminal literally gathering dust, while a doctor quietly writes patient names in a dog-eared paper ledger held together with black tape. It's a story we've heard a million times. The cameras leave, and the tech just dies. But this isn't just some funny little anecdote. It perfectly captures the core issue with our modern governance systems.
And look, the hard data absolutely backs this up. Across a massive 197-country sample, this is a global pattern. Cassan calls it the implementation paradox. Think about the launch phase, those first 0 to 6 months. Political attention is sky high, sitting at 94% media visibility. Because everyone's watching, outcome delivery hits a really impressive 88%. Things get done. But then look what happens by year 3. Sustained impact absolutely plummets to an abysmal 14%. It's crazy. The system consistently rewards all this front-loaded capital and high-visibility ribbon cutting, but it systematically starves the long-term, totally unglamorous day-to-day maintenance you actually need to keep things running.
So, why does this massive drop-off happen? Cassan introduces this brilliant concept here called the governance complexity gap. Basically, it's the widening structural mismatch between the pristine, perfect simplicity of central policy design and the messy, totally unscripted reality of frontline implementation. When that biometric terminal broke in Khalifa, it wasn't because the local folks were lazy or corrupt. No, it was because the budget to fix it sat in some entirely different department hundreds of miles away, and the local clinic had zero authority to access it. It's a structural failure, plain and simple. Planners at the center strip frontline workers of the exact authority they need to solve sudden, unexpected problems.
And this brings us to a really fundamental clash: paper systems versus living systems. You see, central planners absolutely love paper systems. They assume this neat linear path, like if we write a policy and give it a budget, boom, we automatically get our outcome. But the front line, it does not operate on paper. It's a living, breathing social system, full of unpredictable, recursive loops and curveballs. When rigid linear plans crash into the messy realities of human society, the plan just shatters. The policy assumes perfect compliance, but actual reality requires constant, on-the-fly negotiation and adaptation.
To really nail this down, Cassan uses that classic 5 whys trick to trace the disconnect all the way down to its root. Imagine a beautifully printed child protection manual just sitting unused in Baringo County. Why? Well, the local committee didn't meet. Why? No travel allowance was paid out. Why? The county budget was delayed. Why? Because the national payout was tied to these insane, strict reporting requirements the county literally couldn't physically meet. Why? Because the whole institutional architecture is fundamentally built for external control by donors and central agencies, not for things to actually cohere and work on the ground. The system isn't broken, you guys. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do: fragment.
And this fragmentation leads to a condition Cassan calls management fibrillation, which I think is just a brilliant medical analogy. In cardiology, fibrillation is when a heart muscle just frantically quivers, but it never generates a coordinated pulse to actually pump blood. In government, it's the exact same thing. It's this frantic oscillation of endless reform initiatives. A new minister shows up, a new strategy launches, a new form gets passed around, but it never completes its cycle. It just leaves behind this heavy sediment of unused paperwork, annoying new acronyms, and a totally exhausted workforce of civil servants who figure out pretty quickly that the best way to survive is just to pretend to engage without actually committing to the reform.
Which brings up a really provocative question. Can a system that works perfectly in a place like, say, Sweden, succeed in Kenya? The international development industry almost always assumes the answer is yes. They treat public institutions like plug-and-play software. You just download it and install it, right? But as we're about to explore, that assumption is not only fundamentally flawed, it is actively harmful to long-term progress.
Okay, let's look at a very specific case study. An expert flew into Makueni County, Kenya to implement this highly successful gender pay model imported directly from Malmo, Sweden. But look at the Malmo model's foundational assumptions. It worked flawlessly there because it rested on existing infrastructure, comprehensive taxpayer registries, huge labor courts with immediate bandwidth, and this deeply ingrained cultural norm of complying with the state. But over in Makueni, the reality is entirely different. You're dealing with informal agricultural co-ops, a 3-year court backlog, and a history where being strategically opaque was an actual survival tactic. So the program completely failed. Not for lack of trying, but because it assumed a foundation that literally did not exist.
This is a classic example of a trap called isomorphic mimicry, or more simply, form over function bureaucracy. It's essentially fake it till you make it, but for entire governments. Developing states are massively incentivized to adopt the shiny external appearance of world-class institutions, just so they can secure funding and legitimacy from international donors. So they copy the templates, they build the fancy dashboards, they use all the right language, but they totally lack the internal capability to solve their own local daily operational problems. It creates this highly sophisticated facade that masks the fact that frontline service delivery hasn't improved one bit. And the numbers completely validate this trap. Check out these success rates across 197 countries for importing best practices. Direct copy-paste transfers from the global north have an absolutely abysmal success rate. We're talking as low as 18% in public finance. It's terrible. But when those solutions are locally co-designed or heavily adapted to fit the specific local context, that success rate rockets up to 81%. The takeaway here is huge. Blindly copying best practices is an operational failure. It totally ignores the on-the-ground realism you need for a program to actually survive. So, if copying the best doesn't work, what actually does? Well, thankfully, Cassan doesn't just leave us depressed with a diagnosis. He outlines a completely different way to build. This architecture of failure is absolutely not inevitable. Another way is entirely possible, but it requires completely redesigning how the state operates and interacts with its citizens from the ground up.
Enter his ultimate solution, adaptive autonomy. This is a massive paradigm shift. We're talking about an institutional architecture that is centrally coherent, but, and this is the key, locally autonomous. Think of it like this. The center sets the compass, but the edge is empowered and authorized to actually steer the ship. These systems are designed with one primary goal in mind, to learn faster than the complex problems they're facing. They continuously adapt, rather than rigidly following some dusty, outdated manual.
Want to see what this looks like in action? We don't have to look far. Just take a look at the Matatu transit system right in Nairobi. Now, sure, the system has its flaws, for sure. But unlike rigid, centrally planned city buses that just fail miserably in unpredictable African traffic, these informal Matatu minibuses successfully moved millions of people every single day. Why? Because of distributed intelligence. The driver and the conductor adapt to traffic and passenger demand in real time. They have local decision-making authority within a recognizable framework. That real-time responsiveness, that authorized deviance, is exactly the kind of architecture our public institutions desperately need to adopt.
So how do governments actually pull this off? Cassan outlines the principles of coherent differentiation. Basically, you don't want a monoculture, where every single department acts the exact same way. Instead, you want departments acting like the chambers of a heart. They're separated by walls, sure, but they're connected by valves pumping in a coordinated rhythm. To do this, you need 3 things: a shared definition of your core purpose, mechanisms with actual authority to resolve conflicts between departments, and, super importantly, career structures that actually reward civil servants for cross-departmental wins instead of just protecting their own little silos.
But you can't build this new state capability without fundamentally rethinking human capital. Cassan proposes this digital dual frontier architecture, which is basically a 70-30 split. Notice how 70% of a worker's training is focused on standardized, practical core competencies, the absolute non-negotiables of the job. But that remaining 30%, that's an adaptive layer. It's flexible, context-specific learning driven by whatever the local region actually needs. This gives workers a rock-solid baseline, but dynamically equips them with the authority to solve unexpected problems right there on the front line.
Now, how do we fund and measure this new way of working? We have got to stop just counting outputs. Checking a box that says a facility was physically built or counting how many people sat through a workshop. That doesn't tell us anything useful. Instead, we have to look at the capability column. Is that new facility actually being independently managed by the local team? Did the capability truly transfer over to them, or are they still hopelessly dependent on the outside vendor?
We must strictly measure these capability-based outcomes. That is the real metric of success.
To orchestrate all of this without falling back into that trap of reform fatigue, Cassan suggests a quadruple helix governance ecosystem. It brings 4 very distinct players to the table. You've got the government acting as the enabler, academia serving as the innovation engine, the private sector driving commercialization and scale, and, this is crucial, civil society sitting right there as the vital accountability partner. They share collective ownership, but with totally clear differentiated decision rights. It's an architecture of co-ownership that prevents any one single actor from hijacking the whole agenda.
Which brings us to our final, and honestly, probably the most powerful thought of this whole explainer. Right in the dedication of his book, Cassan writes, "Institutions do not have to be perfect to be good. They only have to be designed to learn from you." So, I'll leave you with this provocative question to chew on. How can we start looking past the grand ribbon-cutting ceremonies and begin genuinely designing institutions in our own communities that truly listen, constantly adapt, and relentlessly learn from the very people they were built to serve?